Her whole purpose of staying in the race is essentially to keep Bernie from getting a majority of the delegates.
Yeah.
I just want your opinion because you know probably much more than me. How do you view Elizabeth Warren?
I knew Elizabeth Warren when I was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. She was a right-wing Reaganite, and the University of Pennsylvania.
I just want to make the point. Please look into Warren's past. She used to be a Republican up until she was 47 years old. Think about that.
Had the most progressive law school curriculum in the country.
But it's very important.
And this is Elizabeth Warren. And I taught as a first year of classes, a class called Income Security. Elizabeth Warren said there is no more ridiculous idea than national health care. That's the Elizabeth Warren I knew. She's in her 30s at this time. She was the henchwoman of the right-wing takeover to destroy the left-wing curriculum. I taught workers' rights. I taught the National Labor Relations Act, which doesn't exist anymore for the most part. It's not taught in any law school in the United States. I taught income security, and I taught jurisprudence. Elizabeth was against all those things. I don't really know Elizabeth Warren personally. I just know her as a right-wing Republican. And somehow or another, God came out of the heavens and turned her into a Democrat. Probably at the very moment that Derek Bell stepped down from Harvard because he would not work anymore until they hired an African-American woman. Now, she couldn't pretend she was black, so she pretended she was Native American. That's not what we call people who are Native Americans because they're First Nations people. Apaches and Cherokees were nation, and no such thing as a Native American. But Elizabeth checked that box just when Derek Bell was stepping down. She goes to Massachusetts, she becomes a Democrat. There is no more relentless, ruthless nihilist that I have ever met in my entire life than Elizabeth Warren. She's right up there with Donald Trump. So I can't really support her. She did succeed in destroying that progressive curriculum. And that progressive curriculum is, it's one of those light things you hold on to, right? So I don't trust Elizabeth Warren as far as I can throw her. She has no policy. She doesn't understand imperialism. And she has said that she's a capitalist. What she really is a technocrat who clawed her way to Harvard. I mean, that's where you want to end up, right? If you're a law professor, you want to be at Harvard. Okay, she did that. She succeeded. But as president of the United States, I wouldn't even dream of supporting her because Bernie Sanders, like me, was protesting against the Vietnam War. There are people who have held on to values through a lifetime. And those, Slavoj, are the people I trust.
Crystal Ball explains that Warren is staying in the race in order to prevent Bernie from getting a majority of delegates.
What is Warren even doing at this point? She's not slated to win a single state. She's compromised her image to take millions into a super PAC that is almost certainly funded by cynical wine cave denizens who don't believe one bit in Elizabeth Warren, but do believe that by bolstering her, they can maybe, just maybe, keep Bernie from reaching that majority of delegates. The only impact of her continued presence in the race is to damage the chance of a progressive being able to actually win. Her campaign manager put out a memo saying no candidate's going to get an outright majority, and so the final play is Milwaukee. Her campaign posted a memo to Medium explaining their path forward and committing to stay in the race for the long haul, including with new investments in post-Super Tuesday states. Essentially, they're making a play not to win voters, but to win at the convention with some backroom deal or elite machinations. Her campaign manager, Roger Lau, writes in part, as the dust settles after March 3rd, the reality of this race will be clear. No candidate will likely have a path to the majority of delegates needed to win an outright claim to the Democratic nomination. The convention in Milwaukee is the final play. Basically, she's expressly admitting, first of all, she doesn't have a path to win. She's probably not going to win a single state.
Right.
And her whole whole purpose of staying in the race is essentially to keep Bernie from getting a majority of the delegates.
Yeah.
Listen, liberal or conservative or whatever else, Elizabeth Warren is still very much like Joe Biden and so many of her Senate colleagues, an institutionalist. Bernie is not. So she has an active interest as an institutionalist who will be going back to the Senate regardless of what happens in this presidential race. She has an active interest in maintaining the system as it currently exists. Bernie does not. Bernie represents a threat to it. It will go to a second ballot, and if those superdelegates take it from Bernie, I want to be nowhere near Milwaukee.
No, I think that's
we'll be
right.
covering it here.
Great Sanders friend, Elizabeth Warren, weighed in on this last night in a CNN town hall. She got a question explicitly about superdelegates.
So the way I see this is you write the rules before you know where everybody stands, and then you stick with those rules. So for me, Bernie had a big hand in writing these rules. I didn't write them, but Bernie did. When they were putting together the 2016 platform for the Democratic Convention. Those are the rules that he wanted to write and others wanted to write. Everybody got in the race thinking that was the set of rules. I don't see how come you get to change it just because he now thinks there's an advantage to him for doing that.
What is so disingenuous about that argument is, of course, the Sanders people on the DNC Unity Commission, Reform Commission, what they pushed for was to get rid of superdelegates entirely.
Right.
The compromise position that the DNC hacks forced upon them was keeping the superdelegates on the second ballot. So it's not like Bernie Sanders was like, yay, superdelegates on the second ballot. I mean, let's be clear about what they're proposing here. They're proposing that all these contests that we're covering, that y'all are voting in, volunteering in, organizing for, donating to, all those contests are going to be invalidated and for a group of party elites to pick. And let me just say, putting her like hypocrisy and flip-flopping aside, I don't even think this is the right political calculus because she may not even win her own home state. If she does, it'll be the only state that she wins. Do you really think you're going to end up as the unity consensus candidate?
So the superdelegates, or the actual term in the rules is automatic delegates. When the automatic delegates went into the convention and were, and even before the convention, were allowed to announce who they were going to support at the convention, the press started counting those numbers, and that gave Secretary Clinton an apparent lead, even when she was not necessarily leading in the delegates chosen in the primaries and caucuses.
And the complaint about that, of course, is that it can promote this air of invincibility or inevitability and perhaps affect actual voting in primaries as it goes along, right?
That's correct. Now, by the time we got to the convention, in fact, Secretary Clinton had more delegates that had been chosen in primaries and caucuses. But who knows how those were affected by what people had been reading or hearing in the media about, as you say, the inevitability of Secretary Clinton.
So these superdelegates, James, they do still exist. They haven't disappeared, but they have a different role this time around in 2020. So what will their function be at this summer's convention?
That's right. After a very extensive process where we had 80 hours of public hearing and had recommendations from a committee composed of both Clinton and Sanders supporters, our Rules and Bylaws Committee that I co-chair recommended to the full Democratic National Committee a number of changes in the rules. One of them was that the superdelegates will not be allowed to vote on the first ballot. They can do everything else. They can go to they can be on the floor of the convention. They can be involved in the platform and the rules and so on, but they can't vote on the first ballot. If it should go to a second or more ballots, then they get to vote. But what that means is that when the Associated Press and CNN and so on do their tallies of how many delegates a candidate has going into the primaries in the various states, those superdelegates can't be counted because they may never get to vote if it's decided on the first ballot.
Now, as you all know, you can't miss it if you turn on the TV, the establishment in this country, the economic establishment and the political establishment are becoming very nervous. I think I read something in the paper today that some folks on Wall Street think that our victory will be an existential threat to their greed. And I read something the other day where a lobbyist for the military-industrial complex, he is worried as well that we're going to end endless wars. And the pharmaceutical industry, my God, they're shaking in their boots. Their executives are going to have to take some of their tranquilizers because they understand we will not tolerate in our country paying, in some cases, 10 times more for the same prescription drugs sold in Canada or other countries. And the insurance companies are getting a little bit nervous because the American people are sick and tired of spending twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other country. And despite spending so much, we've got 87 million people uninsured or underinsured. 30,000 of us die each year because we don't get to a doctor on time because we're uninsured. And unbelievably, 500,000 people go bankrupt because of medically related debt. And the insurance industry is worried, and they're spending a whole lot of money on lying ads. They are nervous that the American people understand that health care is a right, not a privilege. And that whether they like it or not, we will pass a Medicare for all single-payer program.